Hey YouTube, so I had the privilege of trying out Acheron early on the Creator Experience server, and I am confident in bringing you guys an early but incredibly detailed guide to get one of the most beautifully animated DPS characters ready to shatter the dreams of every enemy. In this video, we'll be going over all her traces and what she does, Eidolons and any effects on her gameplay, optimal choices for light cones and relics, recommended stat ranges for a full build, and team synergies that she carries. And just as a disclaimer, because I'm able to produce this guide much earlier thanks to the Creator Experience server, there still may or may not be changes to Acheron in the final version, so anything not accurate will be in the description. You'll also notice that there's a watermark over the content. This is a requirement for publishing this content early and to protect my content from re-uploading and copyright strikes. Besides that, if you have any questions, I stream almost every night on Twitch, so you can ask me there, link in the description. Let's begin. So, Acheron's gameplay design is pure raw power enhanced by debuffs. And as you've probably seen, her ultimate is a completely unique design, charged up by certain attacks instead of energy, and transforming her into an alternate form. Here's how she works. When you enter battle, you'll immediately notice Acheron's ultimate circle. Instead of being a circle filled with energy, it's instead a 9-petaled flower called /dreams, with some white and some violet. Empty petals are violet and filled petals are white. If you have her A2 trace unlocked, she'll start battle with 5 out of 9 /dreams and apply 5 stacks of Crimson Knot to a random enemy. We'll get to Crimson Knots in a second. If she happens to fully weakness break any enemies with her technique, she'll start the fight with 6 out of 9 /dreams, 1 extra for the lightning break debuff applied by her. Another perk with her A2 trace is that when she reaches 9 /dreams, which is when her ult is ready, any additional /dream point that exceeds this limit becomes an excess stack called Quadrivalent Ascendant, or QA. We'll get to QA with her technique. In order to stack her /dreams, a debuff needs to be inflicted on an enemy. This can occur through herself, any team member, or even another enemy. Also, if Acheron fully weakness breaks an enemy and applies Lightning Break, this is also considered a debuff and will grant her a stack. This is her passive talent. When any unit inflicts a debuff on an enemy, Acheron will gain 1 /dream and inflict 1 Crimson Knot onto the target. If multiple enemies are hit, the Crimson Knot will stack on the enemy that already has the highest Crimson Knots. Crimson Knot itself is not considered a debuff. If you are unsure of what is a debuff and what isn't, you can look at enemy info and the bottom right will indicate how many buffs or debuffs are active on the target. Only 1 /dream and 1 Crimson Knot will be gained per ability usage. If an enemy leaves or dies with Crimson Knots on them, they will be transferred to the enemy with the most on the field. And final perk associated with her passive, Acheron's ultimate will not only reduce all enemy resistance by a 10 to 20% depending on level, it will also reduce enemy toughness bar regardless of its type. Besides inflicting debuffs, Acheron's skill will also grant 1 /dream and inflict 1 Crimson Knot on the enemy, dealing damage to the main target as well as adjacent targets, making it pseudo AoE. If her skill also inflicts a debuff, for example her signature light cone, then her skill has the potential to generate 2 /dreams and inflict 2 Crimson Knots in one ability. Her basic attack is the standard single target hit with nothing special. If you enable her basic attack to debuff, for example her light cone, then it too can generate 1 /dream and 1 Crimson Knot. Ultimate. This is the most complicated part of her kit, but once you understand what's going on, you can just appreciate the damage it deals. Her ultimate has 4 attacks, 3 Rainblades and 1 Stygian Resurge. Rainblade. First, it deals an initial single target attack to the target enemy, then it removes up to 3 stacks of Crimson Knot from that target. If at least 1 Crimson Knot is removed, it deals true AoE damage to all enemies, and then depending on the number of Crimson Knots removed, the true AoE multiplier ranges from 12 to 48% at level 6. Stygian Resurge. The final hit of the ultimate, dealing true AoE lightning damage to all enemies and removing all Crimson Knots from every enemy. With her ultimate, her A6 trace activates. When a Rain Blade hits an enemy with Crimson Knot, Acheron will gain an all damage % increase, 1 stack per Rain Blade. This damage bonus goes into effect mid-ultimate, so each stack directly benefits the next Rain Blade. If all 3 Rain Blades hit an enemy with Crimson Knot, she'll gain 90% damage bonus for 3 turns. Additionally, A6 enables the final hit, Stygian Resurge, to deal 6 additional 25% multiplier attacks to a random enemy. This damage is considered ultimate damage. Okay, so back to the ultimate. The total damage it can do at level 6 is 297% to the main target and a 240% true AoE to everyone else. Her A6 Trace adds 25% times 6 to random enemies on her final hit. So in total, you can expect each Rain Blade to be responsible for 20% of her total ultimate damage, while her Stygian Resurge is responsible for about 40%. And because her ult is true AoE damage, not just adjacent targets, I would definitely consider her to be a dual erudition nihility character. Now that we've covered her ultimate in full detail, we can explain her technique. So her technique is where QA is explained and also has some unique perks. If you enter battle with her technique, she gains 1 stack of Quadrivalent Ascendance, dealing 200% lightning damage to all enemies and reducing toughness regardless of their type. If weakness is broken, it'll trigger the lightning weakness break effect. Each stack of QA is kinda like a refund system for her ultimate. After Acheron's ult is finished, she'll gain 1 Slash Dream and inflict 1 Crimson Knot on a random enemy for each QA stack. Her A2 Trace increases QA max stacks to 3, meaning she can potentially start with 3 out of 9 Slash Dreams right after her ultimate, and 3 Crimson Knots if you overflowed that much. And finally, if you take a look at the final lines of her technique, you'll notice 2 of the craziest quality of life implemented into a character. First, no technique points are consumed if you don't hit an enemy, meaning you can effectively spam it like a movement skill. And second, attacking a normal, non-elite, non-boss enemy immediately kills them without entering combat. Yeah, it's as crazy as you think it is. As long as you have enough technique points, you can speedrun Simulated Universe way faster than ever by skipping a majority of the trash fights. And before we get into talent priority, let's not forget her A4 Trace. It's a standalone buff, so it's not included in the discussion with her core abilities. When there are 1 or 2 other Nihility characters besides Acheron, all her damage sources, basic skill and ult, gain a final multiplier damage increase of 115 to 160% of the original. This incentivizes her to be played in an almost raw Nihility team, and while it is incredibly strong because it's effectively a non-diminishing 15 to 60% DPS increase, we'll go over in the teams currently why it may not have the best team synergies to activate. Also, this is the passive that receives a direct buff from her Eidolons, which we'll get into later on. Okay, so talent priority, max out everything, ignore basic attack. With the way her scalings go, I would prioritize her ultimate first, and then go for her skill and talent. But even though she's Nihility, I definitely consider her to be a hyper carry, and a hyper carry means that all relevant traces should be invested as high as possible. If you do care about order, her ultimate's multiplier scalings receive the largest gains per level. Trace stat nodes. So she gains crit damage, attack percent, and lightning damage from her stat nodes. So basically, everything should be activated because they all contribute to her damage output. This also means it is beneficial to level 80 her for the final crit damage node, which grants her 10.7% crit damage. Eidolons. So let me preface this section that Acheron is less F2P friendly. We'll have a dedicated section on that later in the video because I think it's an important topic for a lot of you watching. One of her Eidolons significantly improves not only her potential damage output, but also relieves one of the most restrictive conditions about her and improves her ult uptime. While I will always advocate that Eidolons are never worth the price to pay, I cannot deny that for Acheron personally, her kit receives a major upgrade with them. Proceed with caution. E1, free 18% crit rate. Nice. E2, her A4 passive gets significantly improved by reducing the requirement by 1 character. This means she automatically gains 115% of her original damage output at all times, and adding 1 extra Nihility character increases this to 160%. Not only that, every time it's her turn, she gets a free Slash Dream charge and 1 Crimson Knot stack. So this Eidolon is significant and gameplay changing, comparable in strength to Raiden Shogun's C2, which gave her 60% ignore defense. I'll explain. So there are 3 significant things that Acheron gains from this. First, it is exceptionally much more efficient to reach the 160% original damage increase from her A4 Trace passive. Compared to 115%, this is already a 39% DPS increase. 2. Correlating with number 1, E2 allows her to achieve the 160% threshold with a team comp that includes a Harmony and an Abundance Preservation character. Without it, in order to hit 160%, she would need 2 other Nihility characters, for a total of 3 including herself, meaning the last slot you'd have to choose between Harmony support or survivability with Abundance or Preservation. Can't have both. Number 3. 1 extra Slash Dream charge and Crimson Knot per turn reduces her ult cycle from 4.5 turns to 3 turns, assuming no other debuff is applied in that time from your team. with an average of 1 debuff applied per her turn, reduces her ult cycle from 3 turns to 2.25, which is still an insane uptime increase. Overall, E2 alone, in my opinion, is responsible for a possible 50% plus final DPS increase. Combining the increased flexible team building, which means 160% A4 passive is essentially guaranteed, and the increased ult uptime. E3, E5. These are standard level increases, with the ultimate being +2 at E3, which is the most important one. E4. All enemy targets are now branded by Acheron, taking 8% more damage from her ultimate. If this is a debuff, it could also give her 1 stack of Slash Dreams and Crimson Knot. E6. Acheron literally breaks all rules of the game with this one. All of her damage sources are now considered ultimate damage. All of her ultimate damage has 20% all-type res penetration. And finally, all of her damage now breaks any enemy toughness regardless of its typing. And when any enemy has their weakness broken by her, it's considered a lightning weakness break effect, which is considered a debuff and therefore grants Acheron a stack of Slash Dreams and Crimson Knot. GG, go next. I don't know what to tell you. She's broken. That's literally her Eidolons. Light cones. So there's an unfortunate reality when it comes to Acheron. She's a Nihility path character, but I would consider her a hypercarry crit DPS. This poses a problem because the light cones for Nihility are extremely limited to basically none that benefit a hypercarry DPS character. A lot of them provide effect hit rate and damage over time bonus, both of which are completely useless for her. So let's go over her signature light cone first and the insane benefits it gives her, and then see if she can scrape by with any of the other Nihility light cones. I'll do my best to provide recommendations for F2P or budget players who have concerns about what they can use for her. Signature light cone. Along the passing shore. Crit damage plus 36%, and when the wearer hits an enemy, inflicts a debuff called Mirage Fizzle on the enemy. If multiple enemies are hit, all enemies will be inflicted with Mirage Fizzle. Post-edit Xlice popping in here real quick. The localization of Mirage Fizzle has officially been changed to empty bubbles, so you'll have to keep that in mind. I'll also add it to the comments. In other words, anytime you see this debuff called Mirage Fizzle on the enemies, that debuff is the same thing as empty bubbles, just the previous name. Okay, back to the light cone discussion. Against Mirage Fizzle enemies, Acheron deals 24% additional damage from all sources of her damage, and another 24% for her ultimate damage. In other words, Acheron deals 48% additional ult damage and 24% basic or skill damage to Mirage Fizzled enemies. This is just at S1. So, this light cone not only provides insane crit damage and damage bonus, but also inflicts a debuff that's not determined by effect hit rate on any hit to give Acheron 1 stack of Slash Dreams and Crimson Knot. This enables Acheron's basic attack to generate 1 and her skill to generate 2. Now let's take a look at the other light cones. 5 stars. Welts. 24% damage to debuffed enemies and 24% attack for skill. Not bad. Just a stat stick. Does not apply a debuff. Kafka's 24% damage bonus and stacking speed. Can inflict a debuff, but it has a base chance and is affected by effect hit rate, so it's not guaranteed. Not bad. Silverwolf's 12% crit rate, inflicts debuff at a base chance. Has some effect hit rate to help with the debuff. Not bad. Black Swans, DOT oriented, not useful. Solitary healing, break effect and DOT oriented, not useful. 4 stars. Good night and sleep well. This is probably the best 4-star for her. 36 to 72% damage bonus against debuff targets. Does not apply a debuff. The effect applying to DOT is unimportant for her because she doesn't deal DOT damage. Eyes of Prey. DOT oriented, not useful. Pearls of Sweat. Applies a debuff, but it doesn't have a damage bonus. So this is honestly better for a Nihility teammate to carry that's on the same team as her. For example, Pella. Fermata, break effect in DOT, not useful. We Will Meet Again, barely usable. Showtime, Acheron does not inflict a debuff by default, so this is a bait. Crimson Knot is not considered a debuff, and she'll also never have greater than an 80% effect hit rate, so there's no attack bonus that she'll be getting. Tutorial mission, effect hit rate and energy, not useful. And none of the 3 stars are useful. So, looking at light cones overall, I would recommend the following. Her signature light cone, then Good Night Sleep Well, and then Welt, Kafka, or Silverwolf's 5-star light cone. Unfortunately, F2P options are looking a little scarce. I think the only possible choice if you don't have Good Night Sleep Well is purchasing a Welt's light cone from the shop. Alright, so now that we've covered the topics that are directly concerned with an F2P or budget whale efficiency, I think it's important to tackle the following question. Is Acheron F2P friendly? So in my opinion, currently no. If there was a manageable light cone that did most of what her signature does, but way weaker, then my answer would probably change. But because the second best light cone for her is a 4-star, that is losing by 36% crit damage and does not apply a debuff, you're already at a big disadvantage. And then there's the power comparison between Eidolons. So the difference in power between E0 no signature weapon, E0 S1, and E2 S1 are all very significant. We're not even going to talk about E6 S5. Because she is Nihility Path, our default light cones just don't synergize well with her. So the gap between E0 S0, which is no signature, and E0 S1 is at least 25%. Signature at S1 over any other light cone gives her at least plus 36% crit damage, and the ability to debuff enemies, which improves her ult cycle tremendously. E2 S1 compared to E0 S1 is also a massive jump. Like we covered in the Eidolon section, E1 gives plus 18 crit rate over E0, and E2 gives an accumulated 45 to 50% final DPS bonus over E1. So E2 S1 over E0 S1 is a considerable, probably 55 to 60% DPS increase. Now let's reset for a moment and consider this question from a different perspective. Is the content hard enough that her signature or Eidolons are needed? And second, does Acheron objectively function okay at E0 no signature? So I think for the first question, content being hard enough is really up to you. It depends on how difficult you currently find Memory of Chaos, Pure Fiction, and Golden Gears, or Swarm Disaster. Now, does Acheron objectively function fine at E0 S0? I think the biggest feature to target about this question is about Acheron's ability to cycle her ultimate. At E0 no signature, she gains maximum 1 stack per skill per turn. Assuming the other 3 team members altogether can inflict at least 1 debuff per turn, Acheron roughly gets 2 stacks per turn for a 4.5 ult cycle. If her other 3 team members can inflict 2 debuffs for 1 turn, then Acheron's ult cycle is reduced to 3 turns. At E0 S1, her signature light cone helps her generate an additional stack, so she can generate 2 stacks per skill per turn, or 1 stack per basic attack per turn, so she automatically goes from a 4.5 to a 3 turn ult cycle, assuming the other 3 team members can inflict 1 debuff. At E2 S1, she can generate 3 stacks by herself per skill per turn, so she automatically goes from 3 to a 2.25 turn ult cycle. So the question is this: if you can work around her slowest ult uptime at E0 S1 being between like 3 to 5 turns, then I think she can objectively function fine. So it's really dependent on the units that you have available and if you can work around her heavy restrictions at E0 S0. In my opinion, I think that her signature light cone is probably the most tempting choice for budget players because the benefits that it gives are incredibly powerful over not having one. She might have, in my opinion, one of the biggest gaps between her signature light cone and any other possible light cone in the same path. Relics and Planner Ornaments. So best in slot 4-piece relic set is for sure Pioneer Diver of Dead Waters. You gain 12% damage against debuffed enemies, and you also gain 4% crit rate and 8 to 12% crit damage. If your Acheron has her signature light cone, or any other light cone that inflicts a debuff, she can receive double bonus for 8% crit rate and 16 to 24% crit damage. Third reminder that Crimson Knot itself is not a debuff, so the 4-piece passive will not inherently be activated. Other 4-piece DPS options. 4-piece Quantum for 10 to 20% ignore defense, 4-piece Lightning, 4-piece Ice for 25% crit damage during ultimate. This is usable since Acheron's ultimate has 4 strikes, so after the first strike, she'll receive 25% crit damage and buff the remaining hits. 2-piece possible combos. 2-piece Pioneer for the debuff damage, 2-piece attack percent from Musketeer or Deep Confinement, 2-piece Lightning, 2-piece Speed from Hackerspace. And for the Planner Ornaments, we have pretty solid options for this. We have a really good older set, which is Inert Salsodo, giving 8% crit rate and 15% ult damage if her crit rate is above 50%. And then we have new set solid choices. We have Izumo 2-piece, which is 12% attack and 12% crit rate for the same path. And then Sigonia 2-piece for 4% crit rate and 4 to 40% crit damage, basically 4% stacking up to 10 times. My personal favorites are for sure Inert Salsodo and Izumo. The higher crit rate gain makes builds way easier, especially for E0 players. Sigonia is technically highest damage ceiling though, with its cap of 40% crit damage bonus. Main stats. One of the easiest main stat builds because she doesn't use energy. So, for the body piece, crit rate if you're E0, and crit damage if you're E1+. Attack boots, better than speed, lightning orb, and attack rope. So personally, I heavily favor attack boost for Acheron, since her Slash Dreams can potentially be stacked by allies inflicting debuffs, and also enemies inflicting debuffs on other enemies. She's much less reliant on her own turn, and can giga stack offensive stats for the strongest damage output when her ult's ready. To make up for her lack of speed, pairing her with Sparkle or Bronya will alleviate a lot of the issues, and in my opinion is more efficient than running speed boots for her. Essentially, you can view that her speed comes from her supports rather than herself. Speed is obviously still a really nice stat for her, but I'd only try to achieve it if it's an extra substat. Recommended stat ranges for a full build. So, as a hyper carry, we can assume the following investment. And if you're not here, you will be eventually. So first, level 80 out of 80 character and light cone, and then all trace branch nodes unlocked. This gives her the highest level of base stats. She'll be hovering around 3 to 3.5k attack depending on your light cone base attack and any additional attack substats from relics. Crit rate. So crit rate is a pretty broad spectrum because a lot of the relics and planar ornaments don't show the crit rate in the visual window. So if you're E0, at least 75%. Or if you're E1, at least 60% because E1 doesn't show up on the stat page. This includes stats from Salsodo and her 4-piece relic set, which do show up. If you're running Izumo planar ornaments, the 12% crit rate for same path won't show up on the stat page. So E0 will look like 60% plus and E1 at 50% plus. Crit damage as high as possible. Expect around 150 without signature light cone and about 180% or higher with the signature. You can easily achieve 200% plus with a full build. ERR, none. Speed, whatever you can get from substats. And that's it. Team synergies. So Acheron's pretty unique. She's a hyper carry crit scaling DPS, she's Nihility path and benefits from other Nihility teammates, and she doesn't use energy. Typically, when you think Nihility, you think debuffs and damage over time. These characteristics usually call for stat investments like effect hit rate, speed, and attack percent, and avoid stats like crit rate and crit damage. With Acheron, we kinda have a divide. She's the first Nihility designed character that's built like an erudition DPS, dealing true AoE damage and scaling very well off of crit rate and crit damage. But she also gains extra damage from having other Nihility characters on her team, those of which who may not scale the same way that she does. If you have E2, then you're chilling. You just need one extra Nihility, which is really easy to do, and you get 160% of her original damage. But lots of you guys won't have the luxury of E2, just E0. In this particular case, it's really difficult to maximize the 160% threshold without some sacrifices, and you'll probably have to compromise with 115%. So, let's look at the Nihility character lineup and really see what the best synergies for her are. Besides Acheron, we've got 4 5-stars and 4 4-stars. Black Swan, Kafka, Silverwolf, and Welt for the 5-stars, and Gwynaifen, Luca, Pella, and Sampo for the 4-stars. Of these characters, DOT characters have the least synergy with her. This includes Black Swan, Kafka, Luca, Sampo, and Gwynaifen. However, Black Swan and Gwynaifen are kind of in the middle, so we'll move both of them to the other section. Looking at this means that half of the current Nihility roster is currently DOT oriented. While this half can technically be used with Acheron, it's nowhere near as efficient because the skillings are super split. The DOT characters themselves will be just fine, but Acheron herself won't have many team buffs to ramp up her attacks. Acheron may also be taking away from crucial supports to make those DOT teams even stronger, so it's like a lose-lose situation. You grief your DOT team with Acheron there, and you also grief Acheron herself because the party isn't on the same page as her. For this reason, I consider Acheron to be the leader of a different category of Nihility characters, and I believe that the future may hold some excellent Nihility characters who will work perfectly fine with her as supports. What about the rest of the characters? We've got Welt, Silverwolf, Pella, Gwynaifen, and Black Swan. These 4 to 5 Nihility debuffers are what you and Acheron will need to rely on for building a synergistic team that Acheron can carry. Unsurprisingly, the unit with the highest synergy out of all of these is, of course, Pella. 4-star Pella is the best support we currently have for Acheron and is even better when paired with the Light Cone S5 Pearls of Sweat. She's an SP positive defense debuffer and a perfect combo to increase Acheron's DPS output. S5 Pearls of Sweat will enable her to inflict the Ensnare debuff on her basic attacks, giving Slash Dream stack every time she acts. Currently, I have been unable to separate Acheron and Pella. All the team comps that I've been testing out rely heavily on her as the second in command for Acheron. Similar to Pella is Silverwolf, but I would say that Silverwolf is much less universal because she's a 5-star. But even then, Silverwolf still maintains excellent synergy with a massive amount of debuffs inherent to her kit. These two will be the highest synergy Nihility characters that improve Acheron's DPS. Then we get to Welt and Gwynifen. These two are in a more restrictive situation. Welt has an amazing kit, but he's unfortunately SP negative and would require constantly using his skill to give/dream stacks to Acheron. As you can see though, he still totally works, and as a standard character, he's one of the more readily available 5 stars to use. Another downside is that his kit doesn't inherently make Acheron stronger besides being a Nihility teammate and activating the trace. His debuffs aim to cripple the enemy, which, while still very useful, aren't the same benefit as def reduction or res reduction. Moving on to Gwynifen. She's kind of middle ground. SP heavy to apply burn for debuff stacks, but she benefits Acheron by having a branding effect with her Fire Kiss debuff. So I kinda like her, even though she needs skill points. Overall, felt pretty solid to use, and lower investment than other characters because she's a DOT damage dealer with some debuffs, so I just needed some speed, attack percent, and effect hit rate. She's also a 4-star, so more people will likely have her to use. And lastly, Black Swan. Black Swan is actually an amazing Nihility teammate for Acheron, providing her with one of the fastest ult cycling that I've seen. The problem is, I do still think that Black Swan has better complete team synergy with Kafka, so I'd prioritize those two together first. If you don't have Kafka, but you do have Black Swan, then Acheron and Black Swan is an excellent pairing, and you'll be very satisfied with how quickly Acheron is able to spam her ult. With Black Swan, Pella, and Gepard on the trend light cone, the average debuff per whole team turn is about 2 to 3, so Acheron can easily get a 2 to 2.5 turn ult cycle without much effort. Alright, so those are the Nihility characters. My personal favorite, Pella. If you're E2, Pella is all you need to gain 160% final DPS. If you're E0, you'll only be at 115% with just Pella. So either you need to add one more Nihility and sacrifice supports, or you accept the 115% and go for a full team. So let's talk about that, the rest of the team. So with either 1 or 2 slots remaining for the team comp, there's room to consider Harmony supports and Abundance or Preservation supports. E2 Acherons are living the dream. They can easily run Acheron plus Pella plus Harmony turn booster and defense. This is a 2 Nihility, 1 Harmony, and 1 Abundance or Preservation, and will activate Acheron's full 160%, but also have a completed team. E0 Acherons will have to choose. Either you run the same team comp and accept only 115% final DPS, or you trade the Harmony or defensive unit for another Nihility. If you remove the defensive unit, your team has no survivability and is heavily glass cannon. If you remove Harmony, Acheron's damage gets gutted a little bit, but at least you'll survive. Either way, E0 Acherons will have to accept some sort of compromise for their team. Onto her best Synergy support characters. So Acheron's build is likely going to be low speed, like we discussed, to maximize her damage output and rely on team members to either inflict debuffs or boost her turn. So in this aspect, I found best success with either Sparkle or Bronya as a turn booster for Acheron. She benefits from all sources of their specific buffing, whether it's attack percent, damage bonus, or crit damage, and SP usage is manageable if you build around it. Sparkle is a great all-in-one, giving a 50% turn boost on skill points to supplement the constant usage. Downside is because Acheron's fairly slow and Sparkle's turn boost is not 100%, it's only 50, so she won't be going all the time right afterwards. Bronya is a great speed demon for Acheron, allowing her to act as fast as your Bronya because of the speed boost, but skill points may be few and far between on this one. Either choice is excellent and pairs very well with Acheron's hypercarry style, so it's just up to your preference. Onto survival characters. These characters just do their job. Keep your team alive with shields and heals, except for one. The newest 4-star character, Gallagher, will definitely rise in popularity with Acheron because he has built-in debuffs into his kit that don't rely on effect hit rate. Mine is a very minimally invested one, so the healing is not that great. It's just to demonstrate a proof of concept, but I have been using him as my healer for every team with Acheron. His Besotted debuff from the ultimate is unmissable against enemies and does not require EHR stat to land. It lasts for 2 turns on all enemies, and then his next basic attack is enhanced to additionally inflict an attack reducing debuff that's also unmissable. Crazy stuff. So basically, Gallagher is able to grant consistent healing to the team and also 2 stacks of slash stream to Acheron every time he uses this ult plus basic attack combo. As the only defensive character to apply debuffs besides Gepard's skill, this 4-star is an exceptional synergy with Acheron. As a 4-star though, he does have a downside. His healing is not nearly as strong as other characters, and it does not scale with his own HP. It's just a flat amount. So against more difficult content, you'll need to end the fight fast, or your team might slowly be taking a bunch of damage. But as a cohesive unit, I've been really pleased with his performance. And I kinda lied, but not really since he isn't out yet. Upcoming Acheron may also be a synergistic unit with Acheron, but as of this video, he's not out yet, so we'll have to see. With regards to preservation units in general, there is a light cone that inflicts a debuff on enemies, trend of the universal market. So this light cone inflicts a burn debuff on the enemy at a base chance of 100 to 120% if the unit is attacked. Now this works pretty similarly to Pearls of Sweat, but it's not in your control. The unit holding this needs to be attacked, which is fine for preservation because they have the highest taunt in the game. Unfortunately, this debuff is affected by effect hit rate, so depending on your superimposition, the base chance ranges from 100 to 120%. Depending on the enemy's effect resistance, this means your preservation character would need about 40 to 70% effect hit rate in the worst case to land the debuff at 100% success rate. Effect hit rate is usually an unimportant stat for these characters, but some like Japar do use it. It's totally an option, just need more requirements to make it not RNG. Overall, the team comps for Acheron really rest on whether you have E0 or E2 Acheron. E2 Acherons will enjoy a variation of Acheron plus Pella plus Sparkle Bronya plus Gallagher, replacing the 4-star units for your own personal preference. While E0 Acherons will choose between the following: the same E2 comp, just with 2 out of 3 of the A4 trace, or Acheron plus Pella plus a 3rd Nihility in Gallagher, or replace Gallagher with Sparkle or Bronya. Any of these 3 team styles will still be very beneficial for her. And that should be a very detailed guide for Acheron. Overall, I think she's an incredibly strong DPS character, but high investment and not the most F2P friendly. If you're willing to let her be the center of your world though, then she won't disappoint. If you guys enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate if you gave it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel and lets YouTube know it was pretty good. Otherwise, anything I missed or was changed will be in the comments. Thank you guys for watching. Good luck on polling for Acheron, and as always, we'll see you next time. Take care.